Good morning, everyone. Oh, let me get my mic down there. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm really looking forward today. We got a lot of cool stuff to go over. I just want to cover a bit of mechanics first. I'd also like to welcome you all. We're going to explore editing landscape images in Photoshop today. I'm going to share with you some of my favorite techniques to bring out real beauty in this type of photography, because this is one of my true passions. And that includes shaping the light to direct the viewer into the scene, and I'm even going to perform some extreme edits to correct for maybe some lousy atmospheric conditions in cloudless skies. So today's webinar is sponsored by Sekonic, and I'm a big fan of Sekonic meters. I used, in fact, this technically is a follow-up from our last Sekonic video where I did landscape shooting, and I'm a big fan of the meter. I am going to talk a little bit about it because there's some important points to add there. If you haven't joined me before, my name is Joe Brady, and I'm your host today. In addition to being the webinar manager for the Mac group here in kind of cloudy, gray, rainy, cold Elmsford, New York, I own a portrait studio with my wife, Diane. My real passion, however, my first passion, is the landscape. As you can see here, which I enjoy even more if I can get a cup of coffee and a slice of pumpkin pie after a day's photography, at least if it's a cool day. As I mentioned, today's webinar is technically a follow-up to the Sekonic Landscape Photography video seminar. Now, you didn't have to see that for these demonstrations to make sense. If you're interested, though, the recorded video for that session, which is a live video, live and recorded, lives on the Sekonic.com website. Just go under the Classrooms tab, Webinars and On Demand, and you'll see it listed there. So, kind of as an example, what I'm going to do is take an image like this, however nice a scene it may be, and I'm going to show you how to transform it to something like this. Now, it turns out that these clouds actually showed up the next day at a nearby location. Isn't that always the case? And no, I don't feel it's cheating to add the clouds. If I had come back to this exact spot the next morning, I probably would have got something similar to this. What I'm after is creating a vision and a feeling of a place, even if the weather doesn't cooperate. Like many of you, like probably most of you, I don't have the opportunity to be out shooting full time. I have to do other things. And when I get to go to a beautiful place like this, I want to make the most of my images. And oftentimes the weather doesn't cooperate, so I want to get the best image I can. Again, I want to create a sense of what the place felt like to me. Now, in addition, I always shoot raw files when doing landscapes, and you really have to. But the raw files that come out of the camera are often kind of flat and subdued. Now, in part, this is a way for the camera to gain its most tonal range possible. You might have noticed, if any of you guys shoot both RAW and JPEG, that when you look at your JPEGs in Bridge or Lightroom, whatever you're using, there's some reason that JPEGs look better. Well, they've been processed using whatever camera style you have set up. Not so with raw files. Raw files are generally going to be flat and a little desaturated, and that's by design. What I'm going to do is take these images and process them in a way that I remember them, and that was the impression of the place that I got. Now, I am a complete believer in using a handheld meter for almost all of my work. The Sekonic 758, which you see here, is the meter I go to when I'm photographing the landscape. The combination of incident and spot metering combined with all the calculation functions it does give me the exact exposure and all the information I want. Again, I'm not going to go into details about this today, but if you go back to the video seminar on the Sekonic.com site, I talk about that in detail. But if you want the absolute best raw file possible, a meter like this is going to give you all the information to make that happen. No bracketing, no chimping, no missing the shots, just a perfect exposure of the scene in front of you. Now, one of the things that makes this meter special is its software. And again, I'm not going to show this in detail today. This has got a software called DTS, which is data transfer software, nothing sexy there. But what it allows you to do is measure the exact tonal range and response of your camera sensor with whatever lens you happen to be using. Having this information allows you to calculate the best exposure, and in landscapes, we do not want to clip our highlights. That is really important. And you can't really judge the image by what you see on the back of the camera. Nor can you completely trust the histogram, since the histogram you're seeing on the back of the camera is the data from the small JPEG that the camera processes to show you. However, you can always trust the meter. Let me just show you a couple of quick examples of what happens. Here's a plot for my Canon 5D Mark II. I can see from this graph that the camera and lens combination records 3 stops up and 4 stops down from its middle average. You can see that's right over here on the left. You can see +3 and -4. Now you might also notice there's 2 things that say clipping points. That's something you can set. They're kind of the warnings that the meter will tell you you're getting close to the edge. Now, just to show you the difference, here's the plot from my Canon 7D. Now, in this case, I was using exactly the same lens. It was a Canon 24-70 2.8. This camera sensor and lens combination records up 2.8 stops and down 3.5 stops from that middle exposure. Again, this is great information to know because, as I mentioned, one of the most important things to do when photographing the landscape is to protect the highlights. Okay, we're getting close to about time to go into Photoshop. I've got a bunch of demonstrations for you today. And as I mentioned, for those of you that joined me a little bit late, I've got way too much than I can possibly get to in 1 hour. So as I said, I'm going to continue this afternoon session sort of as a part 2 of this session. So if you'd like to join me, you can go on to the Sekonic.com site or back to your invite and register. And again, if not, both sessions are being recorded. We'll send a follow-up email with links to the recording sometime probably by the end of the day tomorrow. And you can watch them whenever convenient. So I'm going to get ready to open up the first image, but first let's take a look to see where we're going to be going. So all of these images were captured during an early September trip to Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Parks in northwestern Wyoming. Now, we were based in Jackson Hole, which put us right in the middle of the Tetons and about an hour south of Yellowstone. And here you can see the 2 parks. Actually, they kind of butt up against each other. If you travel north from Grand Teton, you end up in Yellowstone. Now, the first image we're going to take a look at is called one of the Molten Barns. Sometimes they're called America's Barns. They're probably the most photographed barns in the country. And they are located, again, I'll get you a little map here. There's 2 barns there. They're actually pretty much the same structure, the major difference being the northernmost barn has some old wooden fencing around it. Now, with the Tetons in the background, it's a very dramatic scene. It's best photographed with a mid-range telephoto so that you can maintain the majesty of the snow-covered peaks in the background. And all year round, there's snow on top of these mountains because there's some glaciers there. Now, I personally prefer the southern barn because the view changes dramatically depending on the angle you choose. And it turns out my favorite shot from the trip was one where I shot in a southerly direction, focusing on the barn without having the competing Grand Tetons in the background. So let's take a look. And again, here's the mountains. You can see there's the Tetons, and here's where the barn is, right along this road called Mormon Row. Oh, we're not going to go to Schwabica Landing. Let's go live into Photoshop. Okay, so here is our raw capture. Now, by the way, a couple of you were having trouble not seeing the screen. I am watching this on another computer at the same time, so I do see that the screen's coming through. If by chance your screen is not refreshing, you may want to just exit and come on back in, okay? All right. Oh, and John asked about the data transfer software. What software was that? That's the software that comes with the 758 meter. And there you can actually download it for free from the Sekonic site if you'd like to play around with it. All right, so here's our image. Okay, pretty good. This is kind of a sunrise shot, very golden glow, but it's kind of flat. And again, by design, because most of the cameras will do that to protect the tonal range. So what's the first thing I like to do? Well, this is one thing that you can pretty much do to all your images, and it's going to have some kind of generally cool effect. So let's go through the process. First, and I'm going to ignore these other layers. These are my notes for myself. I'm going to click on the background layer, and the first thing I'm going to do is duplicate it. Now, there's 2 ways to do that. I can either drag it to the little folded page here, or I can just hit Command or Control J, and that will make a copy of it. And what I'm going to do is change the blending mode of this layer. And the blending modes are right here. Now if I click on the blending modes, these all do things, they're kind of grouped in functional areas. With the exception of dissolve, I still have not found a use for dissolve. But this first group here, these blending modes will all darken the image below. These will all lighten. These groupings will affect the contrast. This is kind of a strange grouping. The only one of these I ever use is difference, and I don't think we're going to get that today. And then these last groupings have to do with color. So what I'm going to do is change the blending mode of this duplicated layer from normal to overlay, and watch what happens. Now it's kind of extreme, but you can see it has some good effects. The real trick to this is go ahead and do that and then bring the opacity down. So I'm going to bring the opacity of this down. Probably, I usually go around 30% and see what happens. Actually, in this case, maybe a little more. Let's try about 40. Now, just simply that little act of duplicating and changing the overlay, look what's already done to the image. It's added a lot more pop to it. Now, however, when I did this, I'm looking at the sky. I'm not looking at the rest of the image. I like it when it's a little bit higher on the sky. You can see as I drag this up and down, the effect gets more dramatic. Problem is, it makes the foreground get a little bit too contrasty. So I'm going to leave it at 70% because I really like what it's doing to the sky there. However, what I'm going to do is add a mask. And I'll do that by simply clicking on the mask icon down here. And that adds a mask to my background copy. Now, anywhere I paint on this mask with black, it will mask the effect of this layer on the layer below. Anywhere I paint with white would actually open it up. Now, the mask is currently white, so everything's showing through. So I'm going to hit the letter X on my keyboard to switch black and white, put black in the foreground. And one first quick editing tip if you're not familiar with this. If on a Mac, if you hold down Control Option, on a PC, I believe it is Control right click. If you hold both those keys down and click, as you drag left and right, it will make your brush larger and smaller. If you drag up and down, it will change the edge hardness of the brush. So if you guys were used to using the bracket keys to size your brush, once you do this, you will never go to the bracket keys again. It's just so much faster to do it this way. I actually didn't know until recently that this function even existed. My friend Eddie Tapp showed me this, and once he showed me this, I haven't gone back to the bracket ever again. So typically I'll start at about 10%. Now I can come up here to the opacity slider and I can dial in my numbers, or if I just type in, let me come back in here. If I type in 1, that gives me 10%. If I type 5, it gives me 50%. 9 gives me 90%. 0 gives me 100. So I'm going to start. Actually, I do want to mask a little more of this out. I'm going to work at 20%. I've got black. I've got my mask chosen. And I just want to bring down the contrast of this foreground a little bit by painting with some black. And this is cumulative. So if I continue going over it, it will continue to have that effect. And you can see the mask here. In fact, if I hit Alt or Option and click on the mask, it shows what I just did. So I just add a little bit of gray mask to partially mask that out. And now you can see on and off. Now we're getting in pretty good shape. Now I want to combine these two because I want to do some more operations to them. So what I'm going to do is stack them because some cases I may want to come back to this. So to stacking basically is flattening the image without actually flattening it. You're flattening it, but you get to keep all your layers. And it's kind of a little hidden thing in Photoshop. What you do is you click right here. This is the flyout menu, and hold down Alt or Option while you do that. So I'm holding in the Alt and Option key. And what I want to do is hit Merge Visible. Now I'm keeping the Alt and Option key or Option key down. And what that does is gives me a new layer right above where I am. Oh, I let go. Right above where I am, you see it just created layer 2, which is a combination of the two layers I just made. Now this is going to become real important a little bit later, so I just wanted you to see that. Oh, again, a couple of you asked for the shortcut for the brushes. For you Mac folks, it's hold down Control Option, both of them at the same time, click, and then drag left and right to change the size, up and down to change the edge hardness. And okay. And Norman, thank you for your PC, folks. It is Alt right click on a PC. It does the same thing. All right, so we've got our stack here. And what I want to do now is I want to run it into one of my absolute favorite softwares for editing landscapes. If you're a serious landscape editor, I highly recommend you to make this investment. I'm going to run into Nick's Viveza software, which is under Filter. So I'm going to go into Viveza, and to me, Viveza is the absolute greatest landscape editing. I use it for portraits as well, but for me, mostly I use it for landscapes. So I'm going to move this over here. And first I have global adjustments over here, brightness, contrast, saturation, etc. Those are all kind of okay. One thing I do like to play with, though, is structure. And the best way to describe structure, in my words anyway, is it's kind of a localized contrast. If you guys use Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom, it's similar to the clarity function in the basic panel there. And I'll bring it way up so you can see what happens. You see what it does to the image. Now it can start to make it a little bit, for lack of a better term, a little bit crunchy. Oops, let's just go to 100%. That was too much. And it will add some grain, so you got to be a little bit careful with it. Let's just let the image catch up. All right, so I like what it did to the foreground. It did a little bit too much to the sky. I like what it did, but it just added a little bit too much grain. And there's a couple ways we can deal with that, which we'll get to in a second. Sorry, I keep zooming in when I mean to zoom out. Okay. So I generally wouldn't use 54%. That's usually a little bit much. Also, I will use it a little more sparingly, and I will do it in localized areas. Now, one of the things you can do is you can do all your adjustments globally and then choose to apply it as a brush, which basically gives it a mask which you can then paint out. I like to work a little more locally, so what I'm going to do, I will add a little bit of overall structure to the image, something a little more subtle, maybe around 20%. Then I'm going to add some control points. And one of the beauties of control points is it allows me to affect things that are difficult to edit in Photoshop without really knowing a lot of esoteric kind of things. Like one of the things, bringing down whites without affecting the rest of the image can be kind of tricky in Photoshop. So I'm going to click a point, and when I do that, the first thing I get, let me get my arrow again, is a big circle. And this is kind of the area of influence. This is where this filter is going to be affecting the image. Now, it is also based on the tone. So if I have this white thing here, I can make adjustments. It's not going to affect areas down here, even though the circle does cover it. What I want to do is bring the brightness down a little bit of these clouds. So let's just drag that down a smidge. And then I'm going to add some contrast back in, which is going to make them a little bit more dramatic and start to bring the whites back. And I will add a little more structure into that as well. And you can see it's starting to define the clouds a little better. Actually, I think I made it a little bit too dark. So just about like that. Now, if I like what I've done, what I can also do is just hit Command or Control D, which will duplicate that set. And I can then drag it elsewhere to see where I want. Now, I like what it did over here, but it made this blue in the clouds, although that blue was really there. It made it a little too heavy. So I'm just going to bring down the saturation a smidge to make it look a little more realistic. All right, that's very cool. Now let's do one more. I'm going to go to the front of the barn here. And although it did look like this, I'm going to bring the saturation down a little bit. And that's going to actually, in this case, have the effect of maybe drawing your attention to it even a little bit more. And let's go ahead and zoom in on the front of the barn. A little bit more. By the way, before I started this demonstration, I did resize these files down. Some of these shots were I shot with two cameras when I was out on this trip. One was a Mamiya DM56, which is a 56 megapixel medium format camera, which I shot this image with. Phenomenal images, but the edits take a little bit longer because a raw file is about 100 megs. So I did resize this first. So let's see, what else do I want to do to this? I might add a little structure to the front of the barn to bring out some of the edge details, like around the windows and the boards. Good. And one last thing is, I want to actually bring down the brightness of just the roof. So I'm going to shrink my circle here. I'm going to bring down the brightness to darken up that. Yeah, that looks a lot better. I can also see from when I'm zoomed in that perhaps my sky edit over here is a little too strong. So I'm going to bring down the contrast, and I'm going to bring down the saturation a little more as well, and the structure. I'm going to do something else to that a little bit later. All right, so that was just a handful of quick edits. And as we slide back our slider back and forth, you can see we've already kind of undergone a fairly dramatic change in the image. It's really already changed the mood, and we've gotten rid of some of these real bright clouds over here. The reason for that is because your eye has a tendency to go to the lightest point, and this is not the subject, the barn is. And we're going to further refine that. So let's hit OK. And let's see what Viveza does its thing. It'll go ahead and generate the filter. Again, the software is called Viveza. It's by Nix Software. And by the way, as a thank you for you guys, I will give you a discount code when we're done today, where you can buy anything from the Nix Software site and get 15% off any of their software. So I'll let you know about that. Okay, so let's take a look what we got. All right, a more subtle change, but nice. It's starting to shape the image. Now, the last thing I'm going to do to this image is I do want to shape the light a little bit. One of the things about landscape photography, unlike portrait photography, is you don't get that complete control over the light. So I'm going to do it myself to better help direct the viewer into the image. And to do that, I'm going to create a blank layer just by hitting the little folded page there. And the first thing I'm going to do is change it from normal to overlay. Then I'm going to fill the layer with 50% gray. So let's go there and hit OK. And you see, wow, it's a gray layer, but nothing's happened. If I change it back to normal, you'll see there's my 50% gray layer. Now, the real reason I do this is just so I can kind of keep track of where I paint. Now, what overlay does is anything that is 50% gray has no effect on the image. Anywhere you paint on this layer that is lighter than 50% gray will have the effect of lightening the image, and anywhere you paint darker than 50% gray will darken the image below. So I'm going to get my brush again, and I want to add a little more drama and depth to these clouds again. So I'm going to go to 10%. So I just hit number 1, and I'm going to start painting with black. I'm going to give myself a nice big brush. I'm going to paint with black on this side of the sky. And the cool thing about when you paint black is something that's already white doesn't get affected. I'll make it a little bit smaller. I'm going to darken this area here. Now, yes, I know this looks like a lot, but bear with me because I'm painting a little heavily so that I can then bring it back. Darken up the sky over here. Okay. Now, what I want to do is, this is where I want your focus to be. I want to focus so that your eye is drawn into the barn. So I've darkened the rest of this image here. I'm going to hit X to put white in the foreground, and I'm going to add some light there. Oh, I just realized I was doing something really screwy. I had the wrong layer selected. That's why it was looking so rough. Hold on. That's the beauty of the history panel. Let me get rid of those brushes. Okay. Let's try that one more time. Now I have my overlay layer selected. Let's do the black again. So there's our black painting. That's looking a lot better. And now I'm going to switch to white. And I'm going to paint just roughly. And by the way, guys, typically when I'm doing serious editing, I will use a track. I use my sketch tablet. My Wacom tablet. I'm doing this all for you using my laptop and my touchpad. So you really can do this fairly roughly. I also want to darken these background hills a little bit because there was some haze. And again, that'll have the effect of, again, bringing your focus in. I'm going to darken this little bit of foreground a little bit. And just that one little bit of quick editing, let's turn that back to normal so you can see what I just did. So there's basically the light mask that we just created. That's the light shaping. Let's put it back to overlay. And watch what happens when I turn it on and off. Look at the difference in the image. Now by having that light part in the middle, your eye is more directed to the barn. Now, if you find this a little strong, you can bring the opacity down a smidge. And Again, very cool. If you want to soften the edges, if you want to do that, you can also blur this layer. So let's go to full screen on this, just so you can see. So there's where we started, and there's where we finished up that quickly. Pretty cool stuff. All right, so I see, wow, I've got a lot to cover, so let's continue on. Let's close this one. I won't save this because I already have it saved. And let's see, where are we headed next? Okay, this is one of the most photographed spots in Grand Teton National Park. It's a little kind of a clearing. There's a very rough dirt road that gets to it. It's called Schwabacher Landing. Again, here are the Grand Tetons. Here's Grand Teton, the tallest peak itself. Mormon Row, where we just were, is down over here. And this time we're going to take this really rough road to a turnoff to Schwabacher Landing. And one of the beauties of this is that there's a river that runs through this that gives you a lot of great opportunities to catch reflections of the peaks as the sun rises. Now, one downside of this time of year is that fires are very common, and they're often intentionally set by the Park Service to clear out brush. In fact, the day we arrived, I was moaning, the entire valley was filled with smoke from a couple of really major blazes. Fortunately, a strong breeze came out later that night and cleared out most of the smoke, though some small fires remained. And this can make for a whole lot of haze, and that's something that you can do a lot to cut through with the software. So let's go back into Photoshop and open up our Schwabacher shot. So you guys might see here from my menu, I've got 1A, 2A. All the A's are what I'm going to do in this afternoon's session. So we'll have a whole nother set. Okay, so let me open up my Photoshop file. Oh, I might have opened up the wrong one. This might be the full res. Oh well, we'll let it go anyway. Let me see. A couple questions here. Heather asked if I prefer not to work with smart objects. I do work with smart objects more for portraits than landscapes. Why is that? I'm not actually sure. For those of you not familiar with smart objects are kind of like a link back to the original file. So if you're doing edits to the original file, maybe it's a raw file that you've made edits in Adobe Camera Raw. Or if you go back and do some edits to that image, they'd automatically get updated. I have found, though, for my landscape images, I generally don't do that. Don't know why, but it's just the case. I did just open the wrong file. Again, this was shot with the digital back, because you can see if you look down here, my sizes. This file with all its layers right now is 890 megabytes. So maybe I should open up my little smaller one, just so things will move along a little quicker, because some of the filters could take a little while when you start dealing with images that get close to a gigabyte. Okay, same image. For the screen, it's going to look the same. All right, so this is Schwabacher Landing. Kind of mid-morning. It's about 9 o'clock, 8, 9 in the morning. Sun's already come up. Fairly long tonal range. In fact, I have another shot I'll show you where I actually did this as an HDR a little bit later. But let's see what we can do with the single image. We're going to do kind of some of the same processes, and then we're going to take it a little further. Again, let's do a duplicate of the background. So I'll Command J to do that. Whoops, wrong one. Let me select my background, Command J, and let's do that multiply thing again. I'm sorry, instead of overlay, let's do multiply. That's what I meant to say. Multiply will basically darken. You're duplicating all the data in an image. It's going to darken it. And you can see, wow, it had a really nice effect on the mountains and on the sky, but it made the foreground overly dark, obviously. So we need to mask out some of this foreground. Easiest way to do that is to learn how to handle selections. So what I'm going to do is, on this layer, I'm going to bring up the magic wand. I know there's some people that really hate the magic wand, but it has some great uses. So what I'm going to do is try some. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to try something else. I need to select both the mountains and the sky because they look great. And this stuff in the foreground I want to mask out. I could start to do this all manually, but that's going to be annoying. So let's try something else first. I'm going to go to Select, Color Range, and choose Highlights. Let's see what it gives us. And you can kind of tell from here. No, not quite cutting it, so let's do it manually with sampled colors. So I click on the sky, and it starts to show you what it's picking up. Then I can add to that. I can come down lower in the sky. I can click on the face of the mountains and even these hills here. This is working pretty good. I like what this is doing, and then I can increase the fuzziness a bit to even have it catch more. And you can see I can keep doing this until it starts bringing up the foreground. Actually, that's doing a pretty nice job. So let's hit OK and see what it gives us as a selection. Hey, that worked pretty good. In fact, it even picked out some of the highlights in the foreground. If we zoom in here, pretty good. Although I happen to know that if we leave those alone, it's going to kind of mess things up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the selection of everything in the background, and I want to get rid of the things it picked out in the foreground. So I'm going to bring up my Lasso tool, which is just the letter L. If I hold down Alt or Option, notice that the tool gets a minus in front of it. There you can see that in the black there. It gets a minus. So I'm just going to lasso around this foreground stuff that I don't want included in my mask. All right, pretty good. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to call it Sky and Peaks. This will now give me a mask that I can get back to. All right, pretty good. So what I'm going to do is now create a mask. So if I hit the mask key, it actually gave me just the opposite of what I wanted. In fact, here's what it just selected, as you can see. So what I really want is the opposite of that. So with the mask selected, I just hit Command or Control I, which will inverse the mask. And no, that isn't what I wanted either, is it? No, I did have it the right way first. It just was too strong. We actually liked some of this getting a little darker. So what I can do is do an operation on the mask itself. You might not think that this is something you would mess with. Well, watch if I bring up the levels on the mask, I can increase the output levels, which starts making the black somewhat gray. And you can see some of the darkness starting to come back in. So if I hit OK and now look at the mask, now you can see what it is that we got. So just by doing that, by doing a multiply and then a mask and bringing up the density of the blacks, we actually made a lot of progress pretty quickly. That's already looking pretty cool. Bridget asked what version of Photoshop am I using, by the way. Yes, this is CS5. And someone's being driven nuts by my all my layers being here. Fine, if it's driving you nuts, let me get rid of them. And we just select those. There, these are the layers we're working on. Let's get rid of, so this is everything we've done so far. All we did was duplicate the layer, change the blending mode to multiply, and then create a mask for that. So again, just from there to there, we got that far. Now again, I want to combine these. So I'm going to hold down my Alt key and go to Merge Visible to give myself a stack, because I want to run another filter through this. Another one of my favorite filters is Color Effects from Nick. And to me, the price alone of just a couple of these filters justifies having this set. I use these filters for both my landscape and my portrait work, but one of the ones I absolutely love for landscape work is called the polarizing filter, and it is right here. And you can see if I click on that, I can adjust the strength, and it has the effect of if I actually had a polarizer on the front of the camera. So if I want to get my sky just a little bit denser, you can see it has the effect of also brightening up my foreground a little bit and adding a little bit of contrast. So I like what that did. And just like when we were in Viveza before, you can also add control points and increase or decrease the effect on certain areas. But I really like what it's done. Something new in the latest color effects also is you can create recipes where you can combine. And I've got some of my own custom recipes I've created here, including one where I have a polarizer and add some warmth to it. So you can see right here, this polarizes and adds warmth. Now this particular image did not need that. Here's one where I use this is actually a skin softener. I actually use this for portraits, but strangely enough it has a nice effect on landscapes as well. So you can do this as well. But I'm just going to go back to the standards, and all I really want to do is run the polarizer filter and just get some more density in the sky, because the sky has a little bit of flatness in it. But you can see it also brought out the foreground. So I'll hit OK there. All right, so really cool. There we go. We just got some darker sky, and it added a little bit more pop to the image. Now, one other thing. I think my shadows in these trees are getting a little bit too dense. So I'm going to bring up Viveza again. So let's go to Viveza, and I want to lighten up in here. So I'm just going to add a control point into this. I'm going to increase the brightness till I start to see not too much. I just want to get rid of some of the inky blackness of it. That's pretty good. And I'm going to duplicate that just with Command or Control D and run the same thing right over here. I don't mind having deep shadows. I just want to lighten it up a little bit. Now, one other thing that's going on in here, if I zoom in here to this center piece, is I find, me personally, I find these trees here are bright enough that they're taking away from the peaks a little bit. So what I'm going to do is add a control point right in here, and I'm going to bring the size of the circle down here. I just want to bring down the brightness of these trees here just a little bit. So let's start to bring that down a little. There we go, that's better. And I'm also going to pull a little bit of the saturation out, because I don't want these trees competing with those beautiful peaks in the background. That's good. And lastly, I'm going to bring down the peaks themselves. And again, I'll bring down my circle a little bit. I'm going to bring the brightness down to add a little bit more depth there. But I'm going to increase the contrast, which is going to bring some of the whites back. And I'm going to increase the structure, which will really highlight the shadows and the peaks. Lastly, now I know it's a sunrise and the peaks are a little bit warm, but I want to bring some of their coolness back to make them look a little more. To me, it has a nicer effect that they look a little bit cooler. Not too much, just a little bit. That's working nicely. So let me zoom out a little, and I'm liking the way things are turning out. So I'm going to duplicate again that control I did, and I'm going to put it on a couple of the other peaks. Just saves me the trouble. Very nice. All right, I think we're doing pretty well. So let's take a look and see what we've done. So you can see now by using Viveza, we were able to bring out some of the inky blackness of the shadows. We've added some real drama to the sky, and we really brought the peaks out. Pretty good. We're getting close to done here. So let me hit OK there, and let's see what Viveza did to the image. And someone asked about how do you get the control points to disappear. If you just click off them, they just turn into little dots, and then when you click on the line that separates the image to the before and after, they completely disappear. Okay. Someone asked about dust. Good question. You set me up for that. I have a spot. I don't know how well you guys can see it there. Let me back off. You can see it a little better. I had a spot right here. How annoying is that? So how to get rid of spots? Well, in the past I used to use either the healing brush or the stamp tool. But with skies, that can really be problematic and can create some artifacts. So I'll show you a better way to do that. And actually, I have an action for this. So if you guys aren't familiar with actions, let's go ahead and create one. So first thing I'll do is I will take my selection. So I'm just going to use the lasso and draw around the spot. here's what I like to do. Let's create an action for it. So I bring up my Actions tablet and click on New Action. And we're going to call it No More Spots. And I'm going to assign a function key to it. Let's see, is 3 available? Yes. So F3 is going to be my function key. So what do I want to do? Now, generally when I'm doing any kind of fill, I like to feather my edge a little bit. So I'm going to go to Select, Modify, Expand, and I'm going to add 2 pixels to this selection. And there's a reason for that, which will make more sense later. Then I go to Edit, Fill, and change the use to Content Aware. Hit OK, and then it's gone, and then Command D or Control D to deselect. Then I stop the recording, and now anytime I hit F3, it will do that function for me. And we'll see that again in a little bit. So let me just hide that panel. And one last thing to do. I do want to adjust the lighting a little bit again to direct the viewer. So I'm going to add another blank layer. I'm going to make this an overlay layer like we did before. I'm not going to bother filling this one with gray. I just did that so you guys could see. But I'm going to get my brush, hit D to get black and white back in the foreground. Now there's nothing I really need to darken, but I do want to lighten up kind of a path up the center, up to the peak. So I'm going to put white in the foreground. Again, I'm working at 10%. So I'm going to just kind of create a path. And it's very subtle what's going on here. Actually, I'm going to use some black and just darken the center here. That one little quick thing, take a look, see what's happened. You can see now it's changed kind of where your eye is directed. It's subtle. You don't even realize it's happening, but your eye gets directed now to the center of the frame. One last thing. I'm really happy with this. Oh, sharpening. Let's do that. Let me show you my favorite sharpening trick too. Once again, I'm going to, let me select a layer. I'm going to select the blue sky. And I'm holding down the Shift key to make sure I get that. I don't need this little section here. So again, the lasso, hold down Alt or Option to unselect that. I've got some little dots in my trees here. So let's get rid of those. I took away stuff that was actually sky. We'll leave that alone. Alright, so I'm going to save this selection. And this one's going to be called just sky. Alright, so I've got my sky because what I want to do is I'm going to show you my favorite sharpening for landscapes. So again, I'm going to stack, holding down Alt or Option, merge visible. So now I have a stacked version of the entire thing. And I'm going to run the Smart Sharpen filter on it, which is my favorite filter. Okay, I can think here. Smart Sharpen. And my default settings, it's going to depend on the scene. I will go as high as this, what you're seeing, 180% at 0.8 pixels. This really adds a lot of close detail drama to images. In this case, though, since this particular image was shot with a digital back, the file, it doesn't need that much sharpening. I find these generally work in 50 to 70%. Actually, 80% works pretty good. I'm not sure how well you guys see it on your screen, but it's adding some real fine detail and bringing out the peaks. Now, the downside of doing this is it does add some crunchiness to solid areas. It adds some grain to skies, and you can see around the fringe here, which is why we selected that sky before. So I'm going to hit OK and let it go ahead and sharpen the entire image. And then I'm going to add a mask. And I'm going to load in that sky that we just saved, which is right there. Hit OK. And I'm going to fill that with black. And you see I have black in the foreground. I've got my mask selected. And if I hold down Alt or Option and Delete, that will fill with whatever's the foreground color. And I can deselect that. Now if I click here, you can see there's what we just masked out. So now we just applied the sharpening to the entire image minus the sky. Because you generally don't want to sharpen your skies. It's just going to add some grain. You also might find that I found that the trees got a little bit too sharpened, as you can see right here. So again, I've got a mask here. I'll bring my brush up. I'll work about 50% this time, and I'll just start painting some black on the trees. We don't want to draw attention to them. We're after the mountains. And again, we started here and we went to there. A dramatic difference. Now, one last thing I want to talk about composition. The trees on either side of the peaks are a little bit heavy. They're a little bit maybe overly part of the scene. So I'm going to crop this. So I'm going to bring up the cropping tool and I'm going to select the entire set. So when I do this, you see I have my guide is set to rule of thirds. Now, rule of thirds isn't always necessary for landscapes, but it is kind of a good kind of starting point. And what I want to do is take away a little bit of the trees and focus on the peaks a little bit more. So I'm going to make this a little bit more of a horizontal. And by taking away some of the trees, it will allow you to focus in a little bit more on the rest of the scene. And I think I like that cropping better. What do you guys think? There's before, there's after. And to me, that looks, that has a better focus on the rest of the image. All right? Okay, so let's go back to our full screen. Let's close this one. Okay, so here's an early morning scene. The sun is coming up, and I did expose to the right. I wanted to make sure that I had the most dynamic range possible. So the image is a little bit flat. Now again, on the medium format digital back, I use the exposure from the meter. On my Canons, I have my Canon cameras set so that the picture style default in them is very flat, because I also use them for video, and that really helps with the video shooting. But that means the images need to be processed. So let's go through the process that I like to use. So again, here's a pretty good start. It's a really beautiful scene. There's even a little duck down in the bottom right here. We've got a beautiful reflection off the river, but it needs some oomph. So let's go ahead and start adding. I'm going to ask you guys to, actually, I'll ask you just to ignore these other layers for the time being. So let's go ahead and duplicate the background layer. Whoops, I didn't do that. I added a new layer, sorry. To do that, I can either drag the background to the folded page, or I can hit Command or Control J. So let's just Command J to give us a new background. And I'm going to change the blending mode. And here's a list of all the blending modes. And what they do is they affect what this particular layer does to the layer below it. And they're organized in a sensible way. The first group will darken the image below. The second lightens. The third affects contrast. The fourth does weird stuff. I haven't found a whole lot of use for many of these, with the exception of difference, which I'm not going to use today. And then the last affects color. So what we're after is we want to add contrast. We want to add some oomph to this. So what I'm going to do is change it to overlay. And you can see we've gotten a lot of drama into the mountains, but it's affected the rest of the image. So what I'm after is I want to keep this on the mountain, but I don't want it to affect the rest of the image. So how do I do that? Well, I'm going to add a mask. So I click on the mask icon right here, and it gives me a blank mask. So it's white, so that means everything's showing through. Anywhere I paint black on here, it's going to stop that effect from going through to the layer below. First thing I want to do is get rid of the sky. So I'm going to use the magic wand for that, and I'm going to hit the contiguous button, because I don't want it to get anything else. I just want it to get everything that's in the sky here. And I'm going to leave the default tolerance alone. And I'll just click in here somewhere. I got to make sure I have the image selected, not the mask. So I click, and pretty good. I just missed a little bit of the sky as I zoom in here. Let's go ahead and hold down the Shift key, and that will allow us, while we have the wand chosen, see the little plus appears. That allows me to add to that selection. So let me go back to there. I see I missed a spot here. And I think we're looking pretty good now. Let's zoom into 100%, which I can do real quickly, by the way, by hitting Command or Control 1. And, oops, I lost my selection. Hold on a second. Where'd my selection go? Okay, there we go. All right, so again, holding down the Shift key allows me to add. Let me check the other side, and that looks pretty good. Now I might need this later, so I'm going to save this sky selection by going to Select, Save Selection, and just simply call it Sky, and hit OK. So I'll double click on the hand. That gives me full screen again. And with my mask, there's my mask. You can see if I have anything selected, it automatically creates a mask. Now what I just masked out was all the foreground. Well, I wanted to keep the mountains. I wanted the sky to be masked out. So I can just simply invert that, and I'll do that with Command I. So now I have the sky masked out. So now if I turn this layer on and off, you can see what's happened. So I was able to apply this effect to the mountains, but not affect the sky. So, good start. Okay. Now, Rob asked a question, said that works great if you don't have a bunch of trees on the skyline. I'll be ready for that. So stay tuned. I'm actually going to address that too later. Now, I've got my mountains looking pretty good, but the foreground now is a little bit too dark. So I'm going to add to this mask. I'm going to hit D to get my black and white back into my default colors. Bring up a brush. And a great tip, by the way, if you guys use the bracket keys to make your brushes bigger and smaller, I'm going to show you a way you're never going to do that again. For you Mac people, it's Control-Alt. Hold both of those down and click. As you drag left and right, that makes the brush bigger and smaller. If you drag up and down, that makes the edge harder and softer. Once you start using this, you'll never use brackets again. Alright, so I've got my brush here. I'm going to work at about 50%, and you can see here's my opacity up here. I could open this and drag the slider back and forth, or if I know I want to work at 50%, just type the number 5, and you can see it automatically changes to 50. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit so I can see the image a little better. And get my brush, and I'm just going to start painting. Whoops, I was painting on the image itself. With the mask chosen, I'm going to start painting over top of these areas here that I want to start to bring back. And that's looking a lot better. All right, again, so that quickly, and I can take a look at my mask, what I've got. Oop, I missed a spot right there. And already that fast, we're doing pretty good. So we've made a lot of adjustments already just with that one layer. Now what I'm going to do is I want to add a filter to this, but I'm going to stack this first. And stacking is where you're able to in essence flatten the image and keep all your layers. So to do that, you hold down the Alt or Option key and go to Merge Visible. Now nothing changes on the menu. If you don't hold down Alt Option or Option, it just flattens those layers that you can see. If you keep this held down, it gives you a flattened version of the image, plus you get to keep all of that. Oh, Carl asks a good question. Do I do any corrections in Photoshop RAW first? And the answer to that is yes. I will do a lot of corrections. In fact, thank you for reminding me that. I will do, when I do the next demonstration, I will start out in Adobe Camera Raw. So thank you for that. All right, so I've got my flattened layer. The filter I want to run through this time is one of my favorites for landscape work, and it is Topaz Labs Adjust. Now, just yesterday, Adjust 5 shipped. And Adjust 5, if you're a landscape photographer, actually really any photographer, these filters are really inexpensive and they're an absolute must. 5 adds a lot of new stuff. I'm not going to do a full-blown demo on it, but you can see as you scroll through, up in the upper left-hand corner, you get a thumbnail of the different effects. Now the one I'm running is actually one from 4. It's called Spicify. Yes, it's way overblown. You can see it's really kind of supernatural here, but that's okay. I'm just going to go ahead and run this because what I'm after is just a piece of it. Now that's kind of cool, but it's super done. What I really want to do is just bring the saturation or the opacity of this layer down. So let's bring it down. Let's see what a 50% does. And now it's starting to look natural again, except if we zoom in, you can see It's just really super kind of contrasty and detailed. So I'm going to back that off a little bit more, and that's looking pretty good. One of my favorite filters for doing any landscape work. So again, this quickly we've gone from there to there. So look where we are already. Very cool. Again, it's Topaz Labs. And by the way, as a thank you, when we're done today, I will give you a coupon code that will allow you to get a discount off of any of the Topaz softwares as well as any of the Nix softwares, which we're also going to use. And Gail asks, can you stack filters in Topaz? And the answer is now with Topaz 5, with Adjust 5, yes you can, finally. And Charles asked, do I prefer Topaz over Nik? No, I don't prefer. They're very different. They're very different functions. There's lots of different filters out there to do different things. I use a handful of them. We're going to go into Nik in a little bit. I'm a big fan of Nik Viveza, Silver Effects, and Color Effects. They do different kinds of things, and we'll see that. And Topaz, if you want to look more into Topaz, it's topazlabs.com. Nik is nixsoftware.com. And Sally asked, can I use Topaz in CS3? It's a good question. I know you can use it in 4. I'm not sure. I'm working in 5 right now. That's something you have to look on the Topaz site. Okay, so we're in pretty good shape. I want to do a little bit of fine-tuning, though. I want to add a little bit more light in the middle because I want to direct the viewer up the center of the image in this case. So what I'm going to do is create a burn and dodge layer. And to do that, I'm going to create a blank layer, and I'm going to fill it with 50% gray. So I go to Fill, 50% gray, and hit OK. Then I'm going to change the blending mode of this layer from normal to overlay. Now, you can see as I turn this off, nothing happens. The way overlay works is anything that's 50% gray has no effect on the image below. Anything lighter will start to lighten the image below. Anything darker will start to darken the image below. So if I want to lighten up something, I can bring up a brush, put white in the foreground, and I did that. I switched from black and white just by hitting the X key. And I'm going to work just at 10%. So I'll hit 1 for my 10%, and I'll just start painting a little bit in the middle. And again, my motivation here, and this is going to be a subtle adjustment, but you'll be amazed what it's going to do for the image. All right, just by doing that, that's all I did. In fact, if I turn this back to normal, you can see what it was I just did. That's all I did. I just added that kind of little bit of blob of white in the middle there. But watch what happens when I turn it on and off. Look what it's done. It's added that little bit of light in the middle that directs you more to the middle of the frame. It's a very cool effect. And I can also, while I'm here, if I want to, I think I'm going to darken the foreground, the base of the peaks a little bit. So let me switch to black. And I'm going to just add a little bit of density there. In fact, while I'm at it, I'm going to shrink my brush a little, and I'm going to lighten up the peaks just a little. So what I'm doing is I'm shaping the light to get to where I want to be. So again, just to see what we just did, just that quickly, we've completely changed kind of the dynamic focus of the image just by turning that on and off. All right, so I like what's going on. However, the sky is really boring. And this is one that I think I'm going to add some clouds to. So if you remember before, we actually added a sky. We saved the sky selection. So let me create a new layer. And I will go to Select, Load Selection, and our sky should be sitting there. I actually have 2 of them for some reason. All right, there's my sky. So what I need to do is go get clouds. And whenever I'm out and about, I will always use I will always capture clouds whenever I can, because sometimes you're somewhere and just the scene just needs a little bit. Oh, and good question. Jim asked, why is there a halo over the tree line? It's actually not a halo. One of the things that happens out in Jackson in the Grand Tetons a lot is there's a lot of fires. And a lot of them are intentionally set by the Park Service to clear out brush before it gets out of hand. The day I arrived in Jackson, there were two huge fires completely filling the valley. I thought we weren't going to have much success photographing. But a strong wind came through and cleared out most of it. However, there still were a couple of fires left over, particularly at the base of the mountains, which you can see over here. You see this kind of light gray. That's not a halo. That's actually a little bit of smoke left over from the fires. So that's what is going on there. And if you've ever gone out there, you will definitely see that. So, Jesus asks, what would I do about that? Would I get rid of it? I could. But actually, it actually was part of the scene. I could go back in with that overlay layer and just start darkening it a bit if I wanted to completely get rid of it. However, it's a reality of being out there, and since I've been out there, it doesn't bother me. Good point, though. Yeah, I may want to get rid of it. And again, I could do that just by going back to this layer and darkening it, which maybe I will in a minute. But let's get our new sky first. So I'm going to open up a file. I've got some skies that I shot while I was out there. In fact, I'm going to ask your guys' opinion. All right, whoever tells me first. I've got one with lots of clouds, which is this one. Actually, I'll open them both. Actually, I'll open this real big one. I've got one with lots of clouds and one with a more subtle cloud. So there's my subtle clouds and there's my lots of clouds. So what do you guys want? You want lots or you want subtle? Okay, we got both. Okay, lots came in first. Oh, wait, let's see the opinion. Wow, you guys are evenly split between subtle and lots. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm all about keeping everybody happy, so I'll put them both in and you guys can pick after you see them in there. So let's start with the lots, because I have another reason to want to show you this. So I'm going to hit all. I just did Command A for select all, and I'm going to copy that and just close it. Let me go back to this scene here. And since I've got my sky chosen, and I got my blank layer here, I'm going to go File, or Edit rather, Paste Special, and Paste Into. And I have different color spaces. One's Adobe RGB, the other's sRGB. That's okay. I'll just do the conversion and let it paste in. And wow, I got this really dark blue. What's going on? Well, I'm going to hit Command T to transform. And what's happened is the big cloud thing that I opened up was a huge file compared to the smaller one that I'm working on. So if I hit Command 0, that will actually show me how big that cloud thing was that I pasted in. I could just move it around and have ginormous clouds. But what I'm going to do instead is just shrink it so that it's more closely matched to the size, and then we'll go back to full screen here. Still have issues though. Obviously the color density is wrong, the color is wrong itself. So let's hit V, because V allows us to move our clouds around and decide where they want to go. Let me back off a little bit, and let's see. Let me just move the clouds around, and actually I kind of like them there, but I think I want to flip them around. So I'm going to hit Enter, and I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, Flip Horizontal. So now I have my clouds on the other side. Yeah, I like that. Okay. However, before I leave here, the sky is the wrong color. Now I could start doing a color balance adjustment layer to try to play around with it, but I'm going to show you an easier way. First, I'm just going to move them over. And what I want to do is kind of get them to more closely match the real sky. And we can see we have very different color temperatures going on here. Now, I think this original sky is a little bit too cyan. And this one's a little bit too blue and red. So I'm going to compromise. And to do that, I'm going to adjust it by using the channels. So here's our channels palette. Let's open that, and we get to see red, green, and blue separately. And what I'm going to do is adjust each of these channels so that the new sky more closely matches our old sky. And to do that, I just bring up levels actually on the channel. So I'm going to use Command or Control L. That brings up the levels. And I'm going to move the middle slider so that the grays, the midtones, more closely match. And sometimes this is easiest to do if you step back and squint at the screen. And as I click, I'm going to start dragging over until it starts to disappear. So you see there it's too light. That's a little too dark. That's about spot on. but I'm going to back it off a little bit because I do want it to be a little bit darker than that cyan sky. So let's leave it right there. And then we'll do exactly the same thing for green and then blue. So again, Command L or Control L for you PC guys, and drag so that they match. And there's a pretty good match, and I'm going to back off again a little bit. And then lastly, blue. Now you can't do these all at the same time because the adjustments are going to be different amounts. See, blue needed less on this one, so there, I'm going to back off again just a little bit. Hit OK, and now when we click on RGB, now you can see we're much closer. If I drag the sliders so that these blues, when they're in each of their channels, completely match, then they will exactly match. But again, I wanted a little bit more blue in there, which I can also then adjust, and then I'll just put my clouds back where I had them. And whoops, I didn't want to hit open. I wanted to hit just Command 0 to fit. And yeah, that's looking a little better. I also want to add a little more density back into that. So actually right on the layer, what I'm going to do is go to Hue and Saturation, which is Command U. I'm going to add a little saturation back into that sky, and I'm going to make it a little bluer. All right. So good. So now we went from that to that. Looking a lot better. Now, the problem is I've got a reflection here, and I don't have anything reflecting into it, so I'm going to need to copy that. So let me get rid of my channels here for a second. And what I need to do is go back to one of my full layers. And again, I'm going to use the magic wand. I know some people hate it, but it works great for this kind of stuff. Let me turn off the contiguous thing. And I'm not worried that I'm picking up the sky. I'm holding down the shift key to make sure I get all the blue that I want. Okay, I'm going to zoom out, bring up my lasso tool, hold in the Alt or Option key, that turns it into a minus, and then I'm just going to drag around the areas that I don't want. And there we go. I've got my reflection, the blue parts of my reflection showing. I'm also going to feather this a little later, but stay tuned. Alright, so I'm going to create a new layer, and in this case I'm going to take this layer with my sky. I'm going to do actually let me save my reflection first. Let's save that and we'll call it reflection. So I can just deselect that. So I've got this, my sky. I'm going to take the same clouds I used. I did Command A for select all and copy. And then I'll go back to my blank layer, load my reflection selection back in, and once again I'm going to hit paste into, paste special, paste into. Now one of the problems is it didn't line up, so I just have to use my move key until my clouds show up. The other problem is they're right side up, and I need them to be upside down. So I'm going to go to Edit again, Transform, Flip Vertical, and hit 0 so I can see everything, and kind of get them where I want them, which is probably realistically about there. Pretty good. Now, two things. One, in a reflection, it's going to be a little bit blurred, and two, it's going to lose a little bit of its density. So I'm going to bring the opacity down a little bit. I'm also going to blur it. So I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and actually about 5 pixels good in this case. Now the last thing is we got a little bit of grunge from our selection. It's not a perfect selection here. So I'm going to bring up the mask. See, here's the mask we chose, and it was very particular about where it chose. What I'm going to do is bring up the mask control panel, and I'm going to feather the mask. Actually, let's take a look at the mask. And you can see the mask, by the way, by hitting Alt or Option and clicking on the mask. Then with the mask control panel open, I can actually start to feather the mask, and this will soften the edges so that we get a much smoother placement into that mask. Then we go back there, go back to 0, and I actually see that maybe my blur, no, actually I kind of like the blur. Yeah, that works. Now, one last thing I want to do for this. I do want to add a little bit more pop to it. So what I'm going to do is add one more overlay layer. I'm just going to change it to overlay. And just so you can see again, I will fill it with 50% gray. And I'm going to zoom out because I find it easier to see. I'm going to darken up the sky just a little bit. So I'm going to get myself a nice big brush, work at 10%, and whoops, put black in the foreground. And I'm just going to darken up the sky just to add almost a little bit of a vignette, just to add a little more density to that sky. And I'm going to lighten up the foreground a little bit more right in here. And that's looking pretty cool. So let's take a look at that. So let's, whoops, I didn't want to do that. Sorry about that. Let's take a look. So that's looking pretty nice. And I can turn off all my layers again so you can see the before and the after. So that's where we started, and that's where we ended up. And that's pretty cool. All right. Very good. So let's move on. And we're going to move on to another location. Where are we heading? Oh, we're heading to Yellowstone Falls this time. Okay. In this case, again, heading due north from Grand Teton. We're going to head to, so Grand Teton is just south off of this road. As we come up, there's a big loop around the center of Yellowstone Park. We're heading up here to the Canyon Village area. We'll zoom in on that a little more. And there's a thing called the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, if you have never been there. And there's a beautiful spot right here called Artist Point, where you have a spectacular view of Lower Yellowstone Falls. So let's go take a look there. Let's go ahead and open that up. And again, this is a really beautiful spot. I am actually going to work on the full-size file. Yes, we know. This was shot with the Mamiya again, so it's a 56 megapixel camera. But the detail and the tonal range that this camera captures is amazing. When I was metering this scene, I used the Sharpening meter to spot meter off of the top of the falls because that was the brightest part in the scene. So when I'm metering, I will do that, and then I will take my shot, my actual reading that I'll use in the camera will be opened up 2.5 stops from that bright highlight because I know that is going to be safe. All right, so here's the scene. Here's Yellowstone Falls. And you're going to be wondering why this little white piece is here. We'll get to that. So let me show you how I'm going to handle this. First thing, again, saturation. Just to show you, I'll zoom in at 100% so you can see this is what these incredible camera backs can capture. And this is just an untouched raw out of Adobe Camera Raw. You can actually see there's a group of people standing there. When we zoom back out, you can see that this is a huge file, and this is a single shot. Image size, you can see it's 13 by 19 at 266. All right, so what do I do? Well, it's a little bit flat, and again, intentionally. So the first thing I'll do is add some hue and saturation. In fact, let me just get rid of some of these layers. So let's go into hue and saturation, and we're going to add some overall saturation to the image because it was a little bit flat. So I'm going to bring this up about 20 points, which is pretty standard for most of my cameras. Now, by the way, when you're doing this kind of editing, you really have to make sure your monitor is calibrated. Now, I'm working on my laptop right now. If I were to print these images off my laptop, chances are I'm not going to be happy with them because the laptop monitor is nice, but it's not perfect. If you're real serious about landscape editing, you got to have a good monitor, and it's got to be calibrated and profiled. So what I do before I actually do any printing is I will look at my finished images on my good graphics monitor that is profiled before I go out to print, and I'll make my final edits there. All right, so I've got my saturation up a little bit. That's looking a little better, and we can turn that on and off and see. Yeah, that looks good. However, this the river here leading up to the falls, I want to even bring, oops, sorry, I want to bring this out even a little bit more. So I'm going to do another hue and saturation. But in this case, rather than on the master, I'm just going to work on the blues and the greens. So I'm going to increase the saturation just to the blues, and you can see if I took it to the extreme, it would get kind of crazy. But I'm going to add blue, and I'm going to add some greens to bring out the trees a little more, because most of this scene is yellow and brown. Okay, I like that. So let's zoom back out, and again, let's see. We turn off these two hue and saturations. You can see now it's starting to get a little bit more pop. All right, liking what's happening here. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to stack this image. So again, I'm going to hold down Alt or Option, click on the flyout menu, and choose Merge Visible. That'll give me my stack. And now I'm going to do my sharpening. And again, my favorite sharpening is in Photoshop, is Smart Sharpen. Yes, I have sharpening softwares, but for this case, since this image can be used anywhere, I'm going to use my generic Smart Sharpen. And as I scroll through here, again, I'm not sure how well you guys see it. It's really picking up a nice bit of detail. It's adding some more granularity to the rocks and to the sand. And even though this is a big number, 180%, if you keep your radius below 1 pixel, then you don't get those halos that can sometimes show up. So this is actually usually more than I would use on an image like this, but if strangely enough, this seems to be working pretty good. In fact, take a look at the face of those rocks. If I hold down the mouse, you can see that's off. When I let go, it gets that graininess back, which in this case is what I want. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. There's one however, though. I don't want actually to add that grain or sharpening to the flowing falls. I want that to remain smooth and soft. So after that's done, I'll go back in and mask that out. Now, Harold asked, do I use the X-Rite Color Checker Passport? And the answer to that is absolutely. I use custom camera profiles for all my shooting, and that would be part of the raw process. So I will make sure, actually, a couple of you asked this. All right, I promise the next image I will start off in Adobe Camera Raw, and I'll show you the process. And Alan also asks, what kind of monitor do I use to give me true calibration? I am fortunate to have a couple of ASO monitors at my disposal, and that's what I use. I use ASOS for my final calibration. They are a bit pricey, but if you're real serious about editing, having a good monitor like an ASO or one of the high-end NECs is really a worthwhile investment. Okay, so let's just go ahead and zoom in here. And even though the grain isn't horrible, again, I'm not sure how well you're seeing it, it did add a little bit of grain into the flowing water, which I don't want. It looks great on the rocks. I don't like it in the water. So to this sharpened layer, I'm going to add a mask. And I'm going to bring up my brush, make it a little bigger, and I'm going to paint it 90% on the mask to mask out the sharpening that we just did, because I don't want to sharpen the water. I want the water to have that little bit of blur to maintain its flow. And the same thing down below in the cloud that it's caused. I don't want this to be sharp. That's all part of the beauty of it. And again, you can notice as we zoom in at 100%, what an incredible file that this camera produces. I am really fortunate to be able to have one to borrow occasionally. Okay. All right, so if you take a look, here's my mask. That's what I just did. All right, so somebody asked, why 266 DPI? When I looked at my image size. Well, I didn't choose this. The reason that's there is because I left the image at its original file size. I haven't touched that. I wanted this to be printable on 13 by 19 paper. That's the aspect ratio I wanted to maintain, so that just happened to be the resolution. I typically will shoot for 240, but if I don't want to resample, hold on. If I make this 240, it gives me an odd paper size, and I was shooting for this 13 by 19. So when I put my 13 in there, that's where the 266 came from. Now, what I was after, that's why this white is here. I set my canvas size, even though the image size, in fact, I'll crop it back so you can see the original. Here's what the original file looked like. Let's let that go ahead and crop. I wanted this to completely fill that 13 by 19 sheet because I have a frame and a mat that is designed for that. So that's the reasoning. Okay, you're going to take some time on me. Again, we're dealing with a real big file. Okay, so what I did was I went to Image, Canvas Size, and I made my width 13, and I wanted the image to live on the left. The area that I wanted to expand is, or on the right rather, I wanted to expand on the left. So that's where I will get this. Now, Charles asks, why not 300 DPI? 300 DPI is a thing for commercial printing. It's got nothing to do with inkjet printing. If you actually look at most of the inkjet printers, their defaults are around 240. I generally will not mess with the resolution. This just happens to be the native resolution of this particular file. If I made this image 300 DPI, I'd just be making up data. So I'm just leaving it as a native. All right, so I've got my image. What I want to do is create one more stack. I want to combine everything I've done. And I want to expand this out a little bit to fill the 13 by 19. And strangely enough, it's actually going to work pretty well and not look distorted. So what I'm going to do is select the area just to the left of the river and use under Edit, Content Aware Scale. And that will allow me to just drag this over and fill my 13 by 19 paper. And I just hit enter and let it do its thing. And the strange thing is, it actually looks better. It actually looks normal. That actually looks a little squished when you look at it, even though that was real, and now that looks normal. So we're almost done. We're looking pretty good. One last thing I want to do, I want to add a little bit more shape to the light. So I'm going to create another overlay layer. I'm going to fill it with 50% gray. Again, so we can see what I'm doing. Give myself a brush. I'm going to make a nice big brush. And I'm going to put white in the foreground. And again, I'm going to work at 10%. And I'm going to follow the path from the falls down the river so that this S curve will actually lead you to the falls. So I'm just going to do that. And maybe make it a little smaller. And just following the path up the river to the falls. I'm going to lighten this area of the side of the falls here. And I'm going to lighten these sides. And I'm going to darken, by using black, I'm going to darken some of the foreground a little more, especially over here. Because I really want your eye to, in essence, walk up the scene to the falls. All right, just that little bit, so we can take a look again. Here's what I just did. Here's the light mask we just used. Go back to overlay and watch what happens when we turn it on and off. It's subtle, but it completely changes the focus of the image. Now you're looking at the falls. And you can adjust this to flavor. If you think when you do this that it's too much, you have two choices. One, you can bring the opacity down a little bit, maybe to 80% or so, which I like that better. If you really want to make it more subtle, you can change it from overlay to soft light. Let's turn that on and off. That works too. I think I like it better with overlay. Yeah, I think it's a little more dramatic there. And there's our image. Whoops. There is our image. And it really came out beautifully. Our next stop is a view of Grand Teton from one of the most beautiful spots in the Grand Tetons. And that's a place called String Lake. Now here's a map of the Tetons. Here's the mountains. Here's Grand Teton itself in the lower left. And there's two lakes that are my favorite places to photograph. One is called String Lake, which is right here in the middle. And the other is the southern end of Lee Lake, which is right here. And I'll be doing a demonstration about that this afternoon. So again, here's the peaks we're going to be focusing on. And we're going to be shooting from String Lake southwest towards Grand Teton. So let's go ahead and see what we need to do for that. Now this one I actually shot with my Canon 7D. And I was a little bit bad because I did this handheld. The reason I did it handheld was I was shooting with one tripod and I had my big Mamiya camera on the tripod. So I shot an 8-frame stitch. So I'm going to open up all of these. And again, yes, I resized these to kind of move things along. Whoops, I don't want to show you the before, or the after rather. Alright, so here you can see, here's all of our different shots, and I did this just handheld. So I want to merge all of these into a panoramic. So I'm going to go to File, Automate, Photo Merge. Now, in my opinion, and I've heard people say otherwise, the only one of these layouts to use is reposition. The rest of these to me are just weird. So reposition, and I'm going to add the open files, which are those 8 frames. Is that all of them? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Uh-oh, I'm missing one. Let me add one. I missed this one. Let's open that one. Okay, let's try that now. So File, Automate, Photo Merge. And again, reposition, add open files. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 4. Okay, we got them all. And I do want to blend them together. And I click OK and let Photoshop do its magic. Now, John asks, why am I shooting panels horizontal rather than vertical? Good question. It depends on the scene. I will often shoot panos vertically. This particular scene, though, since it was so wide, and since the lens selection that I had with me fit it, I happened to do this one vertically. I just found it easier to do, or horizontally rather. I found it easier to do, but I will do it either way. It doesn't matter. Okay, so it's almost done doing its stitching thing. And wow, it looks like there's lots of stuff missing, but you'll see that's actually not the case. All right. So this is what happens when you hand hold your stitches. Pretty bad, huh? All right. Usually I use a tripod. In fact, I use a special head called the 5-way head that eliminates all of this stuff. But I had my other camera on that head, so. Okay, first I'm going to crop some of this. I'm going to crop out a lot of what happened here because it's pretty much got what I wanted about right there. Okay, getting closer. We're in pretty good shape, but I have holes here, so I'm going to use the magic wand. And I'm going to do contiguous because I don't want it to select both this top area here and down here. Now, if you remember, we created that action before, and this is the reason that I included that expand on the selection, because sometimes if you do a content-aware fill based on something like this, if you have straight lines like this, it will leave a couple of pixels out, and you can kind of see the border. By doing that expand, that eliminates that. And if I just hit my my function key, there it goes, it's done. Same thing here. So again, what I'm doing through this action, if you missed the action, was after the selection, I go to modify, expand, I'll add 2 or 3 pixels to it, and then go to edit, fill, and content aware. But I don't have to go through all that because we created that action with the function keys before to keep that from happening. And already pretty cool. So here we go. Here we have our full 8-frame stitch. Now, when I was working on this original file, even though this was with my Canon 7D, the 16-bit files, and 8 of them being stitched together, by the time I was done with this image, it was over 2 gigabytes, which is why I shrunk it down for you guys. Okay, so we've got our content-aware fill. I'm going to once again duplicate the layer, and I'm going to change it to overlay. Again, way too dramatic, but I'm just going to bring the opacity way down, somewhere between 20 and 30%. Yeah, that's good. Now, again, just doing that, it's a subtle change, but it's added a little bit of pop to the image. So now I'm not even going to bother stacking this. I'm just going to flatten it, and I'm going to run this through Viveza again. Now, someone asked, why don't I use Sharpener Pro? from actually also from Nick. Sometimes I will. Sharpener Pro generally I use if I'm going to a very specific printer only, but since my images end up in different places, I just like the way I can control the sharpening to my tastes that way. Just a personal thing. I do have Sharpener Pro and I do occasionally use it. Okay, what else? You know what? Let's do an overall brightness change a little bit. I want to bring the brightness down a little. And actually I'm going to bring it up. I think I'm going to decrease the contrast rather to open up the shadows. I want to open up the brightness here, but I do want to get this sky down. So time to add a control point. So I'm going to put that up in the sky, make it nice and big. And I want to bring this brightness down to the sky. And I'm going to add contrast and a bunch of structure. In this case, to kind of really bring out the clouds. Alright, that's looking pretty good. I think I'm actually going to warm it up a smidge too. Alright, so I've got that. I'm going to darken the sky over here. So I'm going to bring that brightness down a little bit. That's good. And again, the focus of the image should be in here. I don't want you looking over here. So I'm going to come right in the middle here. And I'm going to increase the brightness. I'm going to increase the contrast. It's like a cooking show. And I'm going to increase the structure. And then lastly, I want to bring out the distant peak a little bit. So I'm going to add structure to that. And a little more contrast. So we can go ahead and zoom in a little bit and see what we've got going on here. So again, I'll take my arrow and just click off. And if I drag my before and after slider over, we can see, look what we've done already. It's an amazing difference. And this software really makes this stuff much faster than trying to do it all in Photoshop without any help. Alright, and then the last thing I'm going to do for this image is I am going to go ahead and add an overlay layer because I want to do some fine-tuning to my own flavoring on the brightness and contrast again to direct the viewer. So I'm going to get myself a big brush, again Control Option to change the size. I'm going to work at 10% and I want to darken the sky. And again, the nice thing about darkening the sky with this is it doesn't affect things that are white. There we go, a little darker sky. I could have done some of this in Viveza, but sometimes it's easier to see after the Viveza stuff's been done. I'm going to lighten up the fronts of these trees right here. And I'm just going to add a little brightness in here, right in the center where I want your eye to go. And then I'm going to darken this row of trees and that distant peak. And I think really, wow, I think that's short of an edit, and watch what we've done. We went from there to there. So let's look at that. Let's look at that at kind of full screen. It's just a gorgeous scene. And if now a couple of you ask, why did I not fill with 50% gray? The 50% gray has no effect on the brightening or darkening. It's really just to let you see where you've painted, and I just really did that as a demonstration. I think you guys will find once you get used to doing this overlay burning and dodging that you'll get lazy and stop doing the 50% gray. It has, as I mentioned, it has no effect on the actual image itself. It's just kind of a visual cue so that you can see what you've done. And if you want to blur, it allows you to see where you blur, because you can't see places that you've lightened without doing the 50% gray. So a little bit of laziness on my part. All right, I really like this. Wow, where are we going next? Ah, yes. Okay, Lee Lake. And we're going to focus on Mount Moran, which is one of my favorite. It's got a mountain with a lot of character. It's got a big face of it kind of carved out. So here we are. Again, here's the Grand Tetons, and going up towards the northern section is Mount Moran. And we're going to be at the shore of Lee Lake. pointing northwest towards Mount Moran. This is a beautiful lake. It was an early morning here. There was a little bit of a mist, a fog on the lake. It was just an absolutely beautiful scene. So let's go ahead and see what we can do. Yes, here we go. All right, so F to go to full screen. So, oh, this was a stitch. I haven't done any stitching for you guys yet. So let's go ahead and open up some raw files. Even though these are not my raw files, I always do work with raw files, but just to show you some of the edits that I will do, let me just go into Bridge a second. What you may or may not know is that you can open up JPEGs in Adobe Camera Raw. I usually do that more from Lightroom, but let's go ahead and look at our JPEGs. Okay, so here's the 2 frames that made up the stitch. While I'm in Bridge, if I hit Command R, it'll actually open up my JPEGs in Adobe Camera Raw. So let's let that do its thing. So here we are. Even though they're JPEGs, there's certain things we can't do, but there's a lot we can. So here's the 2 frames that made up the stitch. And what I would do first is I would adjust my clarity, my exposure, my contrast. So let's see, what do I want to do? Clarity, let's bring that up a little bit. That will add some local contrast. And I'll add a little bit more saturation. And what else? Now, I can't add my camera profile because that's embedded because it's a JPEG, but if it was a RAW, I would do that. I can go to my lens correction if there was. This had already been done. I can go to the detail slider and add some more sharpening if I want, as well as noise reduction. Now, I generally don't need to do too much noise reduction because I always shoot at the lowest ISO possible. I almost never go over 400 unless I'm shooting theater work, but generally my landscapes are at 100 ISO. Now, once I've made my adjustments here, I need to make sure I apply the adjustments to both of the images that are going to be stitched. So I will click on Synchronize, and well, I can just do everything. Doesn't really matter. Hit OK, and now both images have had the exact same adjustments made to it. And while I'm here, I can click on the workflow options on the bottom and tell it how big I want the files. Do I want them 16-bit? Do I want them 8-bit? What color space do I want to be working in? And what resolution? I'm keeping them small again just for the demonstration. The original files were much, much larger. So I'll just leave it where it was. And I will click on both images and click on Open Images, and that will put them into Photoshop. So we'll let both of these open, and I need to stitch them together. So I just go to File, Automate, Photo Merge, and I always choose Reposition. I don't like the rest of these things. Reposition, I'll add my open files, which are my 2 JPEGs, and click OK. And let Photoshop do its magic. Obviously, again, this was shot handheld. I was not using a tripod for this. Shame on me, because my tripod was occupied with my Mamiya camera. So, I did this before, just to show you guys that are joining us the first time. I create an action to do my fills for stuff like this, because it saves me a lot of steps. So let's go ahead and do that. First, I'm going to bring up the magic wand. Let me bring my layers up. Oh, first thing I need to do is flatten this. And I'll use the magic wand and click. Now, I don't want this. I don't want it to pick up everything, so I need to click on contiguous. I only want to ask it to do a piece at a time. So there's my image. However, before I do a content-aware fill, I also like to expand this. The reason for that being, it just keeps it down. It's a rectangle like this, it would probably be fine. But if you do a little expansion on it, it keeps it from getting a little bit of jaggedy edges. So the process would be select, modify, expand, and I typically add 2 to 3 pixels. This is JPEG, so I'll just add 2. And that just expands the selection a little bit, so that when I then do edit, fill, content aware, it does a nice clean fill. Now, I do this a lot. I use that operation a lot. So what I'm going to do, I create an action for it. So let's go up to the Actions window and click on Create New Action. and I'll call it fill 2 because I already have this created. And let's see, do I have any function keys left? Yes, F4 is open. So we'll click on record, and oops, yes, I will select my area. Actually, I shouldn't do that. Let's stop. That was wrong. Select your area first, then start the recording. Okay, so I'll go to select, modify, expand. I'll add 2 pixels. Go to edit, fill, content aware, and then deselect that. Also, and then I'm done. I'm done with my selection. For something like this, I'll go take a closer look because this is a complicated fill, and I'll see if there needs any cleaning up. Did a pretty good job, but it's not perfect. So I'm going to use my stamp tool, and let me get my layers back so I see them on the right layer. Oh, there only is one. I'll get my stamp tool and just kind of fill in if there's any kind of discontinuities there. Just click on there, and that's pretty good. Just to get rid of stuff that did not work. And that will occasionally happen. Alright, that's looking pretty good. And oh, we also have a little bit of repeating going on up in the upper right hand corner. You can see some repeating patterns there, so I will use the fill just to break up those lines. Just continue hitting Option, and I'm going to get rid of that one. Okay, much better. All right, so here's our stitched image. So again, what are we going to do with this? Let me just check. Let me open up my other file that I've already got prepared. And all right, so here's the process. I'm going to duplicate the background layer. Again, Command J. So I select my background, Command J. I'm going to again change it to overlay. And way too much, but bring it down. 25% or so. And again, just doing that starts to add a little bit more pop to the image. I will stack this by holding down Alt and Merge Visible. And now I'm going to go into Viveza. Viveza is, as I mentioned, my favorite software for editing landscapes. So we'll let Viveza come in. And let me back off a little bit. Now I see it's 2 o'clock. If you guys can hang on for a couple more minutes, I'm going to do a couple more demos. If you've got to leave, again, this is being recorded, and we'll let you know sometime tomorrow where the recording lives. But if you guys are interested, hang on. I'm going to do one more demo for you after this. Let's just get some Viveza stuff done. So globally, first I'm going to add a little bit of structure, which again adds that little bit of fine detail. Contrast is pretty good. Brightness is pretty good. I might add a little brightness. No, I'm going to save that for later. I'm going to do control points. I'm going to come in and add some structure to Mount Moran off in the distance there to give it a little more definition to the peak. I'm going to add some contrast. I just want to bring up the blacks there, and I'm going to decrease the warmth a little bit. Even though the sun was glowing on it, I want a little bit less warmth, and I'm going to bring the exposure down a little more and increase the contrast a little more. There, that's looking better. I'm going to Command D to duplicate that, and I'm going to bring that down to this next part of the peak. Good. Now I also want to lighten up this foreground group of trees here. Again, I want to direct the viewer to the scene. So I'm going to, in this case, I'm going to add a little brightness, not that much, and add a little contrast and a little bit of structure. Much better. And also this grouping of trees over here. Now, one of the nice things about having a black or dark grouping off to one side of the image, especially on the right, is it serves as a visual block to the scene. So if your viewer is looking at the image, most people are going to trace from left to right, and if they have this area here to block them, it brings them back into the image. So it's kind of a handy item to have if at all possible. And then the last thing is I'm going to darken the sky here a little bit. It's just a little too light. That's good. So let's take a look. As we drag the before and after slider over, you can see what we've done. It's really changed. It's really fine-tuned the image. So now we can see the mist over the waters coming out better. You can see the details in the trees a lot better. So I'm going to hit OK. And let's take a look and see what we get. And a lot of this editing is subjective. If you want the mountains to, maybe there is a bit of haze and the mountains are looking a little blue. Do you want that to remain there? That's your call. That's your vision of what the image looked like. Now, I've got one more demo I want to do for you, so I'm really running out of time here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you that I did add a new sky like we did before. I put a new sky in, I put the reflection in, and then I added Spicify that we did in Topaz just before. Again, love Spicify. In this case, it was run at 30%. And then I added a little brightness contrast just to bring it up, just so you can see what we ended up with. Let's go look at that full screen. Oops, not full. And ended up with an absolutely stunning image. Just so you can see, I'll turn off the layers again so you can see where we ended up. So that's where we started. And that's where we ended up. Quite the difference. All right, let's go ahead and get out of here. And let's take a look at a black and white image. All right, so I've got, again, a pano. Let me open up my 2 frames. And okay, so here's an example where we got what looks like pretty dismal day. It was actually kind of raining on and off, but the sky was really dramatic. And this is Jackson Lake looking south. All right, so I've got my 2 frames. Let's do File Automate, Photo Merge. Again, reposition, add the open files, and hit OK. Oh, there's one more thing I'm going to show you when we're done. Something you might have never thought of. Okay, so we've got our 2 frames. I will flatten this image. Just like before, remember, I'll select the areas that we're missing. Remember, we created an action to get rid of this stuff automatically. So it saves us going through all that process. So I just hit my function, and there we go. Now, all right, still fine. It's kind of boring, right? Let's run one of my other favorite softwares, Nik Silver Effects. If you guys are into black and white photography, there is nothing like Silver Effects. So we'll let this come in and see what we can do with it. So you can see there's all kinds of options, and I'm just going to scroll down and let it show me the choices until I see kind of the drama that I'm looking for. Well, let's take a look. I'm really concerned about the sky mostly. Let's see what this does. I'll try full dynamic range harsh. That's pretty good. And what I'm going to do is bring the brightness down, because I'm after the mood of the sky. I also want to bring the contrast down a little bit. And then I'm going to be able to make my controlled effects. So first of all, again, I drag my slider to get my circle of influence here. I'll bring the brightness down to darken that part of the sky. And I want to lighten up the peaks. So let's go ahead and lighten those up. In fact, let's zoom in a bit so we can see better what we're doing. I'm going to lighten that up. And where you place this point is going to decide how much of the surrounding area it affects. If I pick a darker area, it's not going to affect the sky as much. Or I can just make it a little bit smaller. And I'm going to add structure because I really want the peak details to really pop. And a little more contrast. Yeah, that's good. And then I'm going to duplicate that and drag that to some other areas that I also want to come out. And once again, I can just keep duplicating these points to create the effect that I want on each of these peaks. Alright, pretty cool. And I'm going to add one over here. This little bright spot is a little bit of a distraction because it is way off on the left, and I don't want your eye to go there. So I'm going to bring the brightness down, and I'm going to flatten out the contrast because I really want to focus more on the middle of the image. I'm also going to add a little bit of structure to the water in here because these ripples are really kind of cool, and this will bring that out. And I'm going to do the same for these middle clouds. Bring the structure out here because that's where the detail is. Lastly, I can try color filters. If any of you used to do black and white film photography, you probably know that yellow, orange, and red filters would really bring out clouds. So there's yellow, orange, and red. Let's see what that is compared to nothing. Kind of like the yellow. Let's do that. So I'll hit OK. Let the software do its magic. And I'm probably going to crop this when I'm done. I've got a little more image than I probably want because I really love this sky, but let's just take a look and see what it does. Now, Leo asked a good question. For stitch photos, how do I prevent color changes from one photo to the next? Really fairly simply. One, I only shoot on manual, so my exposure, my f-stop, everything, all my settings on my camera are exactly the same for each image. Secondly, when I'm in Lightroom, which is typically where I start, or in Adobe Camera Raw, any changes I make to one image, I have to make to all the images, and that will keep that from happening. So if you're shooting in manual and you're using the same exact settings from shot to shot, as you do that stitch, you're going to find that they're going to match. It really is fairly simple. All right, so we went from that to that. I'm going to even take it one step further. I'm going to go to curves. And now a lot of you could freak out by curves. You don't know what to do. If you drag the middle up and down, what's it going to do? Well, in the later versions of Photoshop, I think 4 and 5, you have this pointed adjustment tool, this clicky pointy thing. And if you grab that and you just want to darken an area, just put it where you want to darken and drag down, and that will darken. If you want to lighten something, click on that area and drag up. And it's really that simple. And you can see it automatically puts the points on the curve for you. And if I want to bring up this water a little bit more, and I'll actually bring this down a little. And that's it. That's how easy it is. It's very cool. So we back to our layers, and now again we've gone from there to there, and we've got a really dramatic sky. Now I'm going to crop this. There's really not anything going on over in this far right hand side of the mountains, so I'm going to crop it to really where the focus is, to something like that. And also there's not anything going on the very top. I am kind of obeying the rule of thirds. I don't want my horizon in the middle. I'm going to kind of keep my horizon just above my bottom third where the water is. Hit enter, and let's take a look at that. And again, a pretty cool sky compared to that's what we started with, and that's what we ended with. Okay, so this is another Schwabiker landing. And I'm going to show you something that maybe you never thought of doing or never thought of using the software in this way. All right, so here's our scene. I'm going to run silver effects on this again. Now, I don't even know if this is the right image to do this to, but let's try. I want you to see what happens. I don't want this actually to be a black and white, but I'm still running it through silver effects. Well, why, you might think? Well, I'm going to add a little contrast by adding, let's see, what is a red filter? Yeah, red filter gives it a lot of, that's pretty sexy. And is there anything else of these presets I want to play with? Probably not. Let's see what this one does. This is high structure. No, that's too much. So let's just keep it there with the red filter applied and hit OK. Now, you can use black and white layers to add a lot of pop to your images. Sorry, there it is in black and white. I don't want it as a black and white. What I'm going to do is change the effect of the black and white layer on the color layer below by changing the adjustment layer here. And I'm going to change it from normal to luminosity. And then I'm going to bring down the saturation a bit, or the opacity. And just by doing that, look what happened to the image. It completely changes the tone. And again, you can mask it as you like. If I decide that sky up on top is just a little bit too much, I can create a mask, give myself a big brush, and I'll work at about 40%, and I'll just paint that back out a little bit. And that quickly, you get a completely different feel with a lot more pop to the image by using a black and white layer. So again, here's normal. This is what we just created. Let me put the opacity back to 100%. There's what we just created for the image, and you're seeing a little blue coming through because I masked it out, compared to luminosity. Now I'll bring it back down. And you might find that the last thing your image needs is to have one of these black and white layers added to it, and then change the blending mode from normal to luminosity, and it's very cool. Okay, we're going to go back to Schwabiker Landing because we're going to do HDR this time. These were shot at f/22 at ISO 400 because I wanted to be able to have focus from the foreground all the way off to the distance. Now, here's my 3 exposures kind of in a graph. Without going into the details of the DTS software, you can safely assume that your camera can capture up and down at least 2 stops from whatever your middle reading is. So what I did was I took my middle reading, my average, which was 1/60th. I came down a stop and a third, which I measured with the meter to see my deepest shadow. And again, 2 stops up and down from there means that this exposure covers from an 1/8 to around 100th of a second. And then my highlight exposure, which will bring my sky down, I did at 1/250th, which is 2.5 stops up. And you can see that these 3 exposures completely overlap, so I have plenty of data for an HDR image. In fact, there's enough overlay that I really didn't even need the middle exposure. This 1/60th image, I could have done the HDR with just these 2, which I actually did as a test later, but it didn't hurt to have the extra file. So we're going to take these 3 and we're going to turn it into that. So let's go into Photoshop, and actually I'm not going to open the images yet because this is one filter that's handled a little differently. It's not under your filter menu. It's under File, Automate, and it's NYX HDR Effects Pro. And what I do is I select the images from here. So let me go to my HDR files, and let me get my 3 exposures. Let me get the list here. Okay, so here they are. It's actually these 3. So I click open. Now there's a ghost reduction method, and what ghost reduction does is, since you're taking a couple of exposures, there might be some wind, things might move a little bit, so I'm going to turn that on. There's adaptive and global. Adaptive is generally what you're going to want to use. That's what's going to handle a leaf if it moved. Global is if you've got something more serious. Maybe somebody walked across the scene and they were only in 1 frame. That's where you would choose that. And medium's a good starting point, so we'll just leave that. So I'll hit OK and let HDR Effects do its magic. So Carl mentioned he uses Aperture. I understand what you're saying. I personally use Lightroom, and I would actually do my starting points from Lightroom, but this is about Photoshop today, so that's why we're just doing everything in Photoshop, because not everybody has both. Alright, so here we have HDR Effects Pro, and there's all kinds of presets in here. You can do surreal, you can do really funky stuff, you can click on these little previews and see all the weird things that it will do, or you can go to landscape and see about scenery. There's real extra vibrancy, something like that. Actually pretty cool. I think the sky was a little overdone for my taste in that one. So what I'm actually going to use is number 3, which is realistic, and it's called strong. And the strong part is it's got a lot of structure built into it, again, the structure being that fine contrast. And I'm just going to turn the structure down a smidge, but I actually kind of like already where it is. So let's see, what selective adjustments do I want to do? I want to add a little bit more pop into the mountains back here. So I'm going to add a control point like we did before. Just going to bring the exposure down a little bit, not that much. And I'm going to add some contrast. And the structure and the other stuff is hidden below. If I hit that little arrow, I can add a little bit more structure there, and there we go. That's nice. And again, I'm just going to duplicate that and drag it over here, and pretty good. Now you can see one of the differences is that already our deep shadows are better because we're doing an HDR, unlike that one we were dealing before. I'm still going to take it one step further, and I'm going to lighten up the shadows in there just a little bit, and I'll duplicate that and put it over here. Alright, pretty good. Actually, that's all I want to do with that. So let's go ahead and open that, and we're going to do something extra fun in this, and that's because I think the sky's boring. And one of the great things and horrible things that can happen to you is you get to some beautiful spot and there's not a cloud for 3,000 miles. So that's kind of why when I was framing this, I added a lot of trees into it. I probably overdid it a bit because there were no clouds, so there's no interest in the sky. In this case, I'm going to add them. First of all, though, there's that out damn spot. Let's get rid of that spot. And again, remember we did our function to just get rid of that. Let's go back to full screen. So let's add a sky. So first thing I need to do is select my sky so I can add into it. Again, I'm going to use the magic wand. Oop, I forgot to turn off contiguous. I want it to give me all of the sky. And that's pretty good. I don't want this down here. And I don't want the stuff over in the trees. In fact, let's zoom in a bit. And I do have some dark shadows in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to expand this selection by another pixel, just to kind of get rid of a little bit of that real dark blue that's in there. Okay. All right. So what I want to do is add a sky. So let me just save this real quick. And I'll call it sky. All right, I'm going to open up another sky, something that's got clouds in it. So let's see what we got here. I have two, one with lots of clouds, one with a little bit of clouds. Let's see. Let's do lots of clouds. So here's my lots of clouds. I'm going to select all, copy that, and close. Now with my sky selected, I go to Edit, Paste Special, Paste Into, and I get this weird looking thing. Now if I hit Command T to transform, Command 0 to put it on the full screen, you can see I've got this sky, but it's way too dark. So how do you match the color of skies? Well, this is kind of a cool trick, and this works with portraits as well. I'm going to push the sky off to the side there for the time being, and I'm going to zoom in. So here's our before and after skies. Not very helpful. So what we're going to do is go back into the channels. So I'm going to look at the red channel, hit Command L to bring up my levels, and I'm going to make the red lighter until it kind of closely matches. I'm actually going to leave it a little bit darker, but you can see now we're getting much closer to that. I just want to back off a little bit because I want a little more depth to my sky. And I'm going to do the same thing for each of the channels, red, green, and blue. Just take the middle slider, move it over until it's almost gone. About right there. And then the same thing for blue. Now the thing is, if you get your red, green, and blues to match the underlying image, then the colors will match. And we do this a lot if we're doing portraits and we've got a shot where we have to swap ahead from one image to another and the lighting's a little different temperature. This is how we do that. Alright, so now let's look at our whole image, and now we can see now we're much closer to the sky color. I intentionally made it a little deeper because I wanted it that way, but now I can put my sky over, and I see I've got some schmutz in my mask. I didn't do a very good job of masking. So I'll go back to my layers on my mask, bring up my brush, make it a little sharper, and this time I'm going to paint it 90%, and I'm just going to paint my peaks back in because I'm painting on the mask. In fact, I can actually leave some of it. It'll actually make the clouds look like some of them are actually in front of the peaks. It's actually kind of cool. And since I have a sky, I can move it around wherever I want. Oops, I grabbed the mask, sorry. I can move it, the clouds, wherever I want. I can flip it, I can stretch it. One of the beauties of clouds is they do scale pretty well. So there we go. We added ourselves a new sky, and you can see since we did that paste into, oops, that it completely goes all the way through all of our trees. So as clouds move around, you can see they just go right behind what we were doing. Very cool stuff. Okay, so landscape photography. It is truly my passion. And I don't get to go out and shoot 200 days a year. It's mostly during vacation time or when I'm running a workshop. So maybe I get out 6 or 8 weeks a year. Sometimes the weather doesn't always cooperate. Sometimes you're going to end up at a spot, as I said, it may be a once-in-a-lifetime trip or it may be fairly infrequent. So I'm not going to let the weather stop me. You start to learn to know what the software can and cannot do. But you can see that cutting through haze, fixing color issues, things like that are things that the software can do phenomenal jobs at that will not stop you from creating an image that not only records the fact that you were there, but creates a sense of the place that you want to communicate to others. And to me, again, that's what makes for a great landscape photograph. You also got to understand the software can't do everything. If it's pouring rain, you're not going to be able to make it sunny. So just enjoy the scene, have a cup of coffee, and put the camera away and just enjoy the beauty around you. But when you have the opportunity to create that great image that invites somebody in, a couple of examples, what we've done today, taken images and made them more how our eye was able to see and how our mind saw the image. When you're at a spot, something like this again Lee Lake or Spring Lake looking back towards Grand Teton, what a beautiful spot. And there are so many spots like this that I'm not going to be able to get to, so I love that you guys can share your photography with me as well. You just get invited into the scene and you just want to explore. And when you do that, that's when you've been successful. This is that Hidden Falls one that I did not get to. This is a combination of HDR and stitching. But what I did was I decided after shooting this that I'm not a real big fan of shooting waterfalls. And to make them really work, you really have to center in on the waterfall. So what I did was ended up cropping it to something like that. And I thought it made for a much more interesting composition. And again, our demonstration with black and white. Learn to know what these softwares can do. When you see a sky like this, you can learn that, wow, there is a lot of drama there to be had. And then lastly, our Lee Lake shot of Mount Moran. So that was a lot in a really short period of time. I'm sorry if I had to rush through some things. I know there's a lot more I didn't cover. I could have gone for another 2 hours. But if you're not using any of these softwares, the Nix software and the Topaz softwares will allow you to get some of these effects done very quickly, and they are investments that are worthwhile if you're a serious landscape photographer. If you use the coupon code JBrady at either nixsoftware.com or topazlabs.com and you check out from there, you'll get 15% off any of the Nix softwares and 10% off any of the Topaz softwares. So remember that. We'll send this in our follow-up email as well. Again, everything's been recorded. We'll send an email to everybody sometime tomorrow and let you know where you can watch the recording or review the pieces you want to see again. If you've got something that's driving you nuts, you got a question you just need to have answered, and it's something above and beyond what I covered today, feel free to send me an email. Send it to askjoe@sekonic.com, and I'd be happy to get you an answer as soon as possible. So thank you for your great questions. Thanks for attending today. Again, if you got any questions, send me an email, and I hope to see you guys online again soon. So until next time, everybody have a great rest of the week, and be well. Bye-bye.